All right, hour number 2 on a Friday. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you here on One Bills Live, and joined now by senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, whose weekly appearance on One Bills Live is presented by Pepsi. Pepsi is the official soft drink of the Buffalo Bills. Food deserves Pepsi. All right, Greg, so Bills, Bengals here, and on paper, Cincinnati's defense looks horrendous. I realize they've made some slight improvements in a couple of areas. Yeah. Where would you feel they have made the most improvement on the defensive side of the ball of late?
Again, putting aside numbers, because obviously, if you just look at numbers, you're not going to necessarily feel that they're a good defense. But I think they've obviously made major changes at the linebacker position. They traded Logan Wilson, so now they play Barrett Carter, a rookie fourth-round pick from Clemson. He basically is their number one linebacker. He plays every snap, and he does show up on film. He plays like he did in college. He's quick. He's sudden. He's one of those smaller, faster linebackers. The other linebacker who plays a lot is also a rookie, the second-round pick, Demetrius Knight from South Carolina. He's been playing most of the season. He's a good player. So I think they're better at the linebacker position. It's the question is up front. Obviously, Hendrickson has not played for a good part of the season now. So up front, they've been playing Asai. They've been playing Miles Murphy, who was a first-round pick a few years ago, who's never quite become what they hoped he'd become. Where they have always struggled, and I still think they're beatable, but this is the discussion we can get into because who knows what the Bills are going to do offensively. I think they struggle on the back end. I think that's the weakness in their defense is on the back end. But the Bills, and I'd love your guys' opinion, you're there. Is it the receivers? Because they play now as if they want to hide the quarterback. And they've got the most physically gifted quarterback in the league, and they play almost as if they want to hide the quarterback. And then maybe in those 2 or 3 times where, the quarterback has to do something, hope that he can do something.
Yeah, I think they're trying to figure out different – they figure they can depend on Josh. So they want to figure out if they can prove or try to beat teams other ways and try and develop that for postseason when you think Josh is going to be fine, particularly if you protect him like they have. By protecting, I mean like the called runs and getting the ball out of his hands, running the football, that kind of thing. And I think, but I agree with you. They have asked less of Josh this year. Certainly James Cook has proven worthy of that. And the offensive line has played extremely well. But I think you're right, Greg. I think they're trying to find different recipes for winning games so that when they get into a tussle with a team they got to beat left-handed, their left hand is pretty good.
Yeah, and because, look, obviously last week's game, the score ended up making it seem like they won fairly easily, but they had 3 points in the first half. You can't count on the Bosa play, the touchdown. Then they got the interception. These are things, look, you hope they happen, but you can't go into a game saying that's going to happen. Their offense is still, for me anyway, and maybe I'm old school and I've always felt Josh Allen was a great player, but I feel like there isn't really a consistent pass game week to week. Maybe it's the receivers. Like I said, maybe
I think
they don't feel. And look, they're not going to come out and say, "Gee, we don't like our receivers." No team's going to come out and say that. But at the end of the day, every coach, as you guys know, coach to what they believe the strengths and weaknesses of their offense are.
Right, and I think to the receiver point, it's a player availability problem too. Kincaid has been out since week 10. Josh is a significantly higher efficiency passer with Kincaid on the field. Palmer is out, and he's doubtful for this game again. Palmer and Kincaid were to be 2 of the top 3 pieces in the passing game. When you don't have those, I think the offensive staff immediately pivots, especially when you have the number 1 running game in football, not to mention the fact that, they didn't have either of their starting tackles last week. So if there was a week to hide, Josh, it was last week, so he didn't get killed.
Right. Well, it's funny, and I think we have to talk about the run game because I was fascinated. And my guess is Aaron Kromer's probably responsible for the run game. Joe Brady might call the plays during the game, but I'm pretty sure Aaron Kromer would be the one that designs the run game. He's been in this league almost 25 years.
Right.
He's one of the best there is as an O-line coach. You know what fascinated me, guys? For weeks, we talked about there was a stretch of 3-4 weeks where all it seemed that we spoke about was that counter gap run where Gilliam would be in the game and Hawes would be the motion guy and he'd be the kick out block and Gilliam would be the wrapper. And then this past week, there were 41 rushes, 32 by Cook and 9 by Ray Davis. Okay. They did not pull an offensive lineman one time on those 41 rushes because I charted it. I started watching the game and I'm thinking, where's the pulls? Where's the run that's been kind of a staple for 4 or 5 weeks? They didn't pull an offensive lineman one time on those 41 runs.
Yeah, they wanted to keep it easy and simple for their offensive tackles. I mean, Alec Anderson hadn't started an offensive tackle since he was at UCLA 4 years ago. Vandemark started. I think he's a quality swing tackle. But I don't think he's the same athlete that Spencer Brown or Deion Dawkins are. No offense to him. So I think that they wanted to keep it simple, and I think they weren't quite certain, what they could get consistently out of those guys. So they pivoted to duo and ran that to death.
Yeah.
Well,
one of the things there was obviously some zone, duo to me is more
inside
of a
zone,
obviously.
One of the things,
even on runs that were not necessarily duo, but more traditional zone. I thought they did a really, really good job with the O-line on 2 blocks that are essential in the zone run game, and that's the front side reach block and the backside cutoff block. If you can't do those blocks, you can't really have an effective zone run game. And I thought that when asked, the O-line executed those really, really well.
One of the things about this offense, and Brownie's right, when they've got all their guys, we've made the point numerous times, they're okay when they've got all their guys, but when they don't, I mean, the offense only scored 19 points against that Pittsburgh team. They got the pick 6. So that's one thing that Josh and this offense have always been able to do is find a way to score points. If that dries up, I think they've got bigger problems. But if you look back at the last 2 games, 19 points against Pittsburgh, 19 points in a loss against Houston. But then you get to the Tampa Bay game, and they lit them up for 40. They only scored 13 against Miami in that bad game they had. So there's been, with that, the exception of the Tampa Bay game, the points have started to dry up a little bit in the last month.
Yeah, they have. And that's why I mentioned the passing game. And I know, look, the reality is it's the NFL. Steve, you can speak to this way better than I. Guys get hurt. You still got to go out and play. Now, you go out and play with what you have and the best way you can play a complete game. In other words, it's not just an offense. It's obviously a defense as well, but I know Bosa will be out this week against a quarterback that, is really good, and T. Higgins is back, so they've got weapons. So we don't know how this game will play out. I'm not a predictor. I'm not a prognosticator. That's not my thing. But you would look at this game and think that they would likely have to score some points. I mean, I don't think any of you would likely see this game unless weather becomes a huge issue where it's going to be a 13-10 game. I mean, I think in this game, you probably believe you got to at least get into the 20s, wouldn't you think?
Yes, and I'll say this, to Steve's point, the last time the Bills put big-time points on the board, it was against a team that struggles to get heat on the quarterback, Tampa Bay. Cincinnati has the same problem. So I think there will be instances where Josh will have opportunities to throw the ball, which leads me to my next question for you, Greg. This will only be Brandin Cooks' second game in a Bills uniform. Was utilized last week, albeit sparingly, understandably so. And it's a guy that's probably going into every week just trying to know the game plan, not trying to learn the playbook, being a late arrival. But what do you think is realistic to expect from him, knowing Palmer's out of the equation and so too is Kincaid, and they may want to lean on a veteran like him a little bit more?
And I think that there's basic routes, Steve, you know this, there's basic routes that you can run, that any receiver can run, that are part of any offense. I mean, maybe you're not going to ask him to work in combination with other routes because that might have specifics to it that are a little bit different than, than normal. But I mean, the first 3rd and long, obviously he hit Cooks this week on the stop route outside the numbers for 13 yards. I mean, you can run individual routes, isolation routes with any receiver. They know those routes. So I think that if the game demands, I think that Cooks can become a factor. Now, having said that, I'm not saying he's going to get 14 targets and go 9 for 130, but I think there are routes that are pretty universal. Steve, wouldn't you agree that are pretty universal in every offense?
Running the routes is the easy part. It's knowing, it's communicating that that's the route you want him to run, having him understand it, and getting the play call without having to go out and just call out and say, hey, run the 15-yard comeback, right? So that's the problem, is learning the words and the vocabulary. The routes and the physical part of it, that's universal, right? So,
but sometimes, and this, Steve, you're probably in this situation with players, in Buffalo, where sometimes you can call a play in the huddle, and then you can, just as the huddle's breaking, you can say to Cooks, hey Cooks, on that play call, you're running a stop or whatever the route is. You just tell him what it is, and he's going to know how to run it because he's run it 1,000 times in his career.
Then the problem becomes checking at the line of scrimmage and going to a different play and all that. And
you do have all those other factors. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying there are universal routes, and I believe that he can run those. And
certainly
that's okay.
too, at this point, after he's been here now, going on 2 weeks, there's been a ton of study and a ton of conversations that are getting him more and more comfortable, both on the field and off the field. So you can bet that he will have a larger menu that he can go to than he did this last Sunday in Pittsburgh.
I love, too, what Brownie said. I'm very interested to see what the Bills' approach is. Obviously, they're going to try to run the ball. I'm not saying they're going to come out and, by choice, drop back 45 times. But I thought Brownie's point about the pass rush of the Bengals, which has really not been a factor much at all, which has been kind of a flaw and weakness in their defense. It'll be interesting to see if they feel like they can take advantage of that. Now, again, they're a running football team. They're really good at it. They get Dawkins back this week. Maybe that means you'll see a little more pulling. We've seen that in the past. But, there are going to be situations where you have to throw it. You are going to want to throw it at times by choice as well. You'd love to see, because they don't really throw the ball down the field. And there could be many reasons for that, and we don't know all of them. But you'd love to see maybe a shot play here or there, or the ball just be thrown a couple of times, 20-plus yards, and see if you can, get a few explosives.
Right.
Flipping it to the other side, no Bosa is obviously a loss for a pass rush that didn't have a lot of production to begin with. It is interesting, though, that the Bills now have 10 takeaways in their last 6 games after having only 5 in their first 6. We've seen Tre'Davious White get put in coverage on tight ends, and he's had a measure of effectiveness in that. I'm anticipating this. I'm curious what you think. I'm anticipating Tre'Davious White gets assigned Gesicki in obvious man coverage situations I'm talking about here. I think Benford's going to follow Chase, and then you put Hairston on Higgins and figure out the rest after that. What do you think about that, knowing this is the first time that this Bengals crew has all those cats on the field since week 1 or 2?
Well, the question becomes how much man versus how much zone do they play? Obviously, they're going to play some man. I mean, everybody has to play man somewhere along the line. But what foundationally will be their approach? The one thing about Burrow, whether it is man or zone, once you go outside the numbers, you pretty much have to match up, Brownie, as you know. And the one thing about Burrow is if he believes he has one-on-one on the outside and there's not going to be a safety that's going to be a factor over the top, he attacks the one-on-ones, and he is not shy about it. And the issue there is those create big plays. I mean, you saw that last week in his first game back when he hit Chase for 43 yards. I mean, he's going to go and attack the one-on-ones, and you just can't give up those plays. I mean, maybe you give up one just because they're so good, but you got to be really, really careful because he can hit those plays. And plus, the one thing he's really good at, and this to me is a great chess match game, because I think one of the things Sean McDermott's been really good at over the years is I think he's really good at changing the picture pre-snap to post-snap. And Burrow is so good at just seeing that. He's like a computer chip like that. And that to me is a major chess match in this game, because Sean McDermott's been a master at that for years. When I've talked to offensive coaches, that's one of the first things they say about Sean when I ask them about Buffalo's defense is that he's so good at that, just changing the picture, that what you see it right away is not what you're going to get, and it's more subtle than it is dramatic. But Burrow is been really good at that. That's one of his superpowers.
Yeah, and the Bills, we talked about Cincinnati's pass rush not being a factor. The Bills' pass rush, particularly now with Bosa not being able to go this week, it's kind of this. Do you think the Bills? Is this one of those games where you kind of rush 3, drop 8, and double team the top guys? All the way across the board.
It's
you know what I mean?
Great question. I mean, because obviously the normal thought would be, hey, you got to pressure Burrow and make him play faster. But if you don't feel like you have those guys, you probably don't really want to blitz. They're not a heavy, high percentage blitzing team. Now, let me ask you a question. Is Bernard playing this week?
Nope. No.
So he's out again. Okay. So it's going to be the same group. I tell you what, picking up Shaq Thompson turned out to be a godsend, wasn't it? I mean, that guy has played great football. Looks like he did when he was 23 years old, and he was, one of the best athletes in the league. But so they're not really a high percentage blitzing team. It's a great point, Steve. What do you do in those sort of must-pass situations where, if you don't feel like you can really get there with 4, and Burrow's the kind of guy that, he normally sees it well. Do you think in terms of clogging, windows and, it's a great. That's another part of the chess match in this game. I don't know. It's hey, that's why those guys get paid the big bucks, and we're sitting here chatting.
That's right. And that's we talked about. It's going to be a really interesting matchup on both sides of this. You feel like Buffalo, both offenses have an advantage, but they also have trying to play complementary football and win the game. And Cincinnati has the engine that they could put it to the floor and go 200 miles an hour, and you got to keep up with them.
Yeah. I mean, look, Burrow's the kind of guy that any given week, if he's really on his game, and, granted, it's only his second game back, but he's Burrow, where he could be great against any defense. And, who knows how the game will play out, but, as we said, it's not likely to be a low-scoring game unless weather really dictates a change in the way teams, have to play.
Well, right now it looks like it's going to get 1 to 3 inches on Sunday during the day. So it's going to look a lot like the playoff game weather-wise here 2 years ago where it was snowing during the game.
What, Greg, can you say about the high missed tackle percentage of this Bengals defense? It's among the highest in the league, according to some of the next-gen stats. It looks like both of the safeties have high numbers in that area. So does Demetrius Knight, the linebacker you mentioned earlier. It looks like they've given up over 900 additional yards, according to the metrics, because of missed tackles defensively. Do you still see that as an issue that crops up on the tape?
Yeah, it does. And Battle to me is, I don't want to call him a liability necessarily, but he's not a great athlete. He's almost more like a linebacker type player. And I think he's a guy you can go after, in multiple ways. He's not a great tackler in space because he's just not a really good athlete. And you can really go after him, in my view, in coverage. Stone, to me, is really more of a back-end player who's not a top back-end player. But that's what he is. You know what I mean? I mean, that's who he is. He's a back-end safety, but he's not great at it. So, that's why I mentioned their secondary. And all year long, they've been trying to mix and match. They've basically made Dax Hill, he's an outside corner now, who'll move inside in their sub packages. But they've essentially made him an outside corner. And he's probably the best athlete of their corners. But their back end is beatable, Brownie. And that's why I started by saying I'm really curious to see how they approach this, because I think there's going to be opportunities to throw the ball in this game.
Yeah, I would expect it. I think it's going to mirror something similar to what we saw against Tampa Bay. I mean, sure, they'll try to run the ball, but if they see opportunities, I think they're going to try to take advantage of them, mainly because I don't think the pass rush of the Bengals is anything to write home about. So I think they feel Josh will have time to make those kinds of plays. So hopefully it happens.
I mean, you'd love to be in a situation, and they haven't been like this, as Steve mentioned. there were a time they were like this, but not recently. You'd love to see a situation where all of a sudden they're ahead 17-6. And not that the game's over, obviously it's not, but just that the game starts playing out a little differently. And you don't feel like every possession is, you're sitting there on the edge of your seat, that
Right.
you have a little breathing room.
Right.
Greg, thanks for the time as always. We appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week.
All right, guys, thanks. Have a good one. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
That's senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, joining us, talking to us about Bills Bengals for Sunday at 1 p.m. And Bills Mafia, it's tailgating season. There's nothing better than an ice-cold Pepsi Zero Sugar to pair with your tailgating food rituals. As the great Josh Allen once said, Bills fans deserve Pepsi. Bills Mafia has brought it this season, and so is Pepsi. Bills tailgates deserve Pepsi. Go Bills.